All right. Again, once again, thank you so much for joining and welcome to our May 20th technical council meeting. The agenda for today is the following, at least what I would propose. Um, we have some additional feedback and some work that was done, excuse me, there was some additional work on the standards for URI and URI resolution that had been done over the past 2 weeks, working with Yuri, um, and working with Jordan. Yes, I think I said it right? And
Yeah.
would love to go through a final feedback for these two. We also had some workshop sessions on invocation standards, but I didn't get a chance to get an update from Jordan whether that's ready for final feedback, so I was going to ask about that. However, before we get started on this, what I would like to discuss is the following. Process change for standards workshop schedule. And I'm not sure if we have enough quorum to make that decision, but I'd like to bring that up to the technical council discussion, and we can potentially make some adjustments in the scheduling. So the goal here that would like to do is that now that we have a very good process in place and we have a great cadence, now we'd like to scale that cadence up. There is definitely a desire to increase the velocity by which we are producing the standards. And excuse me. And one of the options that we can do that is to just increase the number of workshops to a reasonable amount. I'm not recommending that we're going to do like a daily workshop or anything like this, but I think having standard um, 2 or 3 workshops a week, and we can agree on what that number is. And maybe, um, I have a couple of recommendations, suggestions, and want to hear your feedback. Excuse me. So what I would like, but one of the challenges that I run into is that, of course, scheduling it every week and so on and so forth through when to meet is something possible, but it's incredibly time consuming and availability is somewhat scarce. So what I was going to suggest to the technical council and see what your opinion is to set up um, 2 regular workshop sessions per week, locking on the Polywrap calendar. And then during our technical council meetings, we can, based on our priorities, determine how those going to be taken up. Like, let's just say for the sake of argument, we agree on a Tuesday and Thursday schedule for the, every Tuesday and Thursday, let's say at 11 a.m. Central or whatever whatever the time we pick right now, we have a fixed pre-allocated time for the workshops. Then during the technical council meeting, we would go through a prioritization process. So we'll take a look at the standards, for example, and say, hey, our next priority standard is going to be working on, let's say, configuration client standard. And that involves again, Yuri and Niraj, right? I think that's Yuri and Niraj. So we can say, Yuri and Niraj, we have an upcoming workshop session on Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Are you available to join that? And sort of once we agree for those meetings, those you kind of try to keep those open as much as possible. And then we can sort of line that up a lot easier that when we already have those meetings set up. So that's one thing. Then we can further scale that by scheduling, for example, if we decide that we want to go through a couple of workshops, let's say 3 or 4 workshops a week, we can double them up. We can organize the workshop for the same time, as long as people it's not the same people who needs to be present on the same workshop. So we, for example, can take configuration and let's say serialization, which has other folks, well, maybe Niraj, but let's say there was another one, like WebAssembly runtime that only has Jordan and Nestor on it. We can double this up with URI resolution, for example, at the same time and just coordinate workshop that happens in two channels at the same time. And this way, we can still kind of work as a team at the same time, but nevertheless have a little bit more throughput. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Do you like that idea? Is that something you think will work for you guys?
I think that sounds pretty good. I'm not sure how. So, how many meetings would that be a week?
So
Two.
what I'm recommending is that we would have regular schedule of two workshops a week, two blocks of time for workshops, and could have actually multiple workshops, like I said, in parallel at the same time. But we'll have two blocks, and then we'll actually have a regular block of hours for just a weekly technical consult meeting. So it will be 3 meetings a week that's dedicated to technical consult per week, or 3 blocks of hours that are dedicated to technical consult per week, out of which one is requiring everybody from technical consult to join, obviously per availability, which is the actual technical consult meeting, and the other two is going to be optional depending on what's scheduled for that day. But you try to keep that hour open in case the story that gets allocated to that hour has you. So for example, on Tuesday, next Tuesday, we decide we're going to go through URI resolution, and that's obviously for you, Yuri. But if we say invocation standard, it's going to be somebody else. And then that way you get the free hour.
I mean, it sounds okay to me, but it does sound a bit much, maybe. I'm not sure what the rest of the guys think about it.
Um, I'm new here, and I have just been in 2 meetings. This is my second one, a meeting of technical council. But I think this sounds great. Um, I think that I mean my only suggestion would be that basically to do this somehow in sprints, and basically with something in mind, like with a concrete objective, I would say. For example, the technical consoles, if I understand this correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's to basically create this wrap standard, like Polywrap standards, and documentation, and like define these really well thought technical standards. So I would suggest that, yeah, basically like set goals. Like for example, we want this, and this for, I don't know, 2 weeks, right? And like define these objectives and tackle that for thinking in the mid long term. I would say suggest. I don't know if this makes sense, but basically, yeah, like doing little sprints of technical counsel to like make sure we achieve goals with these workshops, because I feel these are like sprints, if I
Yeah,
understand this correctly. So yeah, yeah, like yeah, that's my suggestion. I don't know if that makes sense,
it does.
but
Let me actually comment on that. So in a sense that we're doing that to some extent, we don't have like a sprint deliverables. In that sense, we're more organized like a Kanban. But in terms of the iterations, we're already operating in sprints. So for example, um, there's just to kind of step back a little bit. You mentioned that technical console is focused on developing the standards. That's correct. That's one of the components the technical console is focused on. There is a second component, um, and if we go to a technical console, we kind of outlined it here. Standards is one of them, is one of the key focus area, but the other one is the features definition, which is related because as we define features for by technical console of what needs to be discussed and evaluated, to some extent, some of them at some point translate into needing a standard. But those are the two key focus areas, which is we also have identified technical debates that we have around certain features, and sort of kind of have the design discussions in terms of the direction that that gets implemented and what teams are going to pick up to flesh out a particular feature prior before it's even ready for any standard discussion. Um, and the way that we operate this, Caesar, is we kind of have a bi-weekly process. So this week, today's technical console is all about standards. And we're going to line up activities for standards for the next 2 weeks in terms of what priorities we're going to take them on and what sessions we have surrounding them. The next sprint or excuse me, the next meeting is going to be all around features. And during that discussion, we'll finalize and review all the features that were on the board that were allocated for completion in the past sort of sprint, right? And then we go into a 2 week sprint for that. So there is a sort of an ongoing overlap of 2 week sprints of standards and features, if you will.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, I think that would make sense if that's the case. And thank you for this explanation. Yeah,
The
I
only
agree
the only
with.
reason why I didn't say it was a sprint is because we don't have a very clear like sprint deliverables per se. It's more of a Kanban in that sense, is that if it's completed before sprint, great. If it goes over to the quote unquote next sprint, that's fine too. Because we recognize that the standard, the technical console activity is second to development work, and developers will always prioritize, and technical console members will always prioritize the let's say alpha release activities before completion of the technical console activities, and that's why we're trying to gamify those and make them a little bit more interesting so we can get together during the workshop and work on that sort of as maybe a breakup of the break up the day of focusing exclusively on the development and spend some time working with the team members to talk about the standards, the new features, have some design hat on at that point, and some, make it as exciting and interesting as possible. So,
Cool.
That's
yeah, yeah. How does that sound? Sounds so. Any comments on what you just said? And that sounds good for everyone. Just a quick
that all
explanation.
sounds good, but in terms of workshops, I kind of feel like one meeting a week is enough. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Like, are we in a hurry to push all of these out?
So this was deliberately some, that I received a couple of direct messages saying this is all working great, but velocity needs to increase. So I
Okay, okay.
think, so that's what I'm suggesting now is in the effort to bump up the velocity of the delivering standards specifically and the standards documentation. Um, but one thing that I can maybe the compromise, if you will, is to uh, adopt certain rules. And there's a couple of rules that I would like to adopt to help with this process. And I also wanted to recommend that to the council. The one rule is specifically to what you just said. Let's make sure that as much as possible, no two workshops for the same week are scheduled with the same people. So if I'm asking you to join on Tuesday, for example, Yuri, I'll make sure that I'm not going to ask you to join on Thursday. Another workshop will be scheduled for Thursday
Mhm.
that doesn't have your name on it per se. So we can adopt that rule, and the technical council facilitator can, work towards enforcing that. Or if that's not possible for whatever reason, then certainly request an explicit permission saying, "Hey, Yuri, we have two, critical standards that needs to be come up. I'm gonna schedule one for Tuesday. Is that okay if I schedule one for Thursday? That's more than what you committed to, but would you make yourself available?" Like that would be treated maybe as an exception to the rule that will require explicit permission, so to speak. And if you say, "Yeah, I'm available, I'll make that happen," then great. If not, then we'll move it to the next week, type of a deal. Would that work?
That sounds good. So technically, there will be one workshop meeting per week for a person, but we will do multiple in parallel, so multiple meetings. Yeah, I think that's good.
As much as possible. I mean, this is obviously also
Yeah,
experimental, and we have a small console, so that might not work very well because everybody going to end up, needing to participate in every workshop, and that's going to break that cadence. But we'll work with what we can, right? We'll um, um, uh, if we can, we can set it up. If not, if everybody's busy, then we'll skip that session. We'll go to the next one. The other rule
maybe
that
that's a good.
go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe that's a good thing to do then, or to ensure that the assignees are at most two people, maybe three. Not having like 4 or 5 assignees feels a bit too much, and the kind of it doesn't really scale well.
Yes. Right. It's interesting because that sort of was part of what my second recommendation, some adopting some rules are. And what I was going to recommend, well, I was actually sort of going on the other direction, on the minimal. I was going to recommend that we don't have any stories that have one person assigned to it. I think we should have at least two, because that gives some flexibility there as well. But I also think we can have a maximum as well, not no more than three. Between 2 and 3 people is what we're saying should be owned by, the standard storage should be owned by.
I think those two rules are good, like at least two, and I think three should probably be an exception to the rule.
So we should always target 2 people per story, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so the minimum requirement of two people would ensure that there's some redundancy, both in terms of dishing these out, but also in terms of actually having multiple people taking ownership of a standard instead of relying on a single person to know about it or to
Hmm.
have defined it. But the maximum enables us to not only have more velocity and to have more the ability to do stuff in parallel, but also allows everyone to contribute more to the standards, so there's less there's less centralization of standard, right?
Yeah.
The worst thing you could have is have a single person that's needed for all of these standards, like with, let's say, Jordan.
Okay. All right, so I think we can start working towards adopting this rule. Let's maybe have a quick discussion around the timing. I would like to recommend. I don't have a good calendar to present right now in front of us, but give me 1 second. Let me see if I can do this real quick. Get rid of some. All right, that works. So this is what Polywrap calendar looks like right now. What I would like to maybe recommend, and this is based on Central Time Zone. Um, what I would like to, we have our weekly technical consoles on Friday, which also I think problematic because that creates, people, especially during the summer, are going to be less and less available during Friday. What I would like to recommend is that we move our technical console meeting to Tuesday or Thursday, for example, and then we have Friday. Let's say, so let's maybe make a recommendation. So let's move the technical consult to Thursday, for example. That's one option, and then have Tuesday and Friday at 11 o'clock, kind of keep the same timeline so that there is a consistency there. Our workshop sessions, and then Friday obviously will be one of those workshop sessions where we're very explicit about who can join, who cannot join, and things like that, because that becomes Friday's Friday. Some people might be available, some people no, but because it's not the actual technical console meeting where we want everybody to attend as much as possible, Friday could be a workshop session where in some cases you might need to be attending if you can, and in some cases you don't. What do you guys think about that kind of a cadence and change in scheduling?
Fine by me.
I agree. Uh, I agree profusely.
Who was that? I didn't see it. Still,
Nestor, me.
Nestor. How are you, Nestor?
Namesti. Yeah. How are you, Eugene?
Thank you for joining. Niraj, what do you think? Is that going to work for you? Joe, how does that sound for you as well? Sorry, we didn't get a chance to get feedback from Jordan, but I'll get that from him separately.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
All right, so I'll post a note, but just to summarize this, we're at this point kind of homing in a recommendation that we'll move the technical consult from Fridays to Thursdays, and then at the same time we'll try to keep the same, that 11 a.m. Central timeline or whatever it is in your time zone, and then Tuesdays and Fridays are going to be our standard workshop sessions, and during our planning we will will determine who will be, what that workshop session is going to be taken up by. Sounds good? All right.
Sounds
So
good.
let's move toward that. All right. So given that, let's do this. So we have a couple of things. Let me go back to the um, to our agenda real quick. So let's do this. Let's go through a final feedback review for the two standards that we have ready for that. We will hold off on this two. I'll schedule those out, and then before the end of the meeting, we'll schedule out our Tuesday and next Friday workshops. So we have priorities on those already defined, and then I'll send out explicit invitations for those.
Sounds good. Just FYI, I got a hard stop in like 4 minutes, but I'll push it off for like 10 or 15 minutes more
Okay.
so that I can go through these two.
All right. So let's go through the RI first. Would that be okay with you, Yuri? Yura?
Yeah, sounds good. Give me a second.
So just a couple of process adjustments on that as well. So the way that it works best so far, the way that I see it, is that all the work will be done in the HackMD. The reason for that is because we can have um, um, a collaborative effort in that, so everybody can be typing it at the same time. The technical console facilitator, myself and Joe, are going to be responsible for posting this to the GitHub library afterwards, but we'll also be collecting feedback there. So one of the things that I did in this work, and I'll have that for every workshop session, is that within there, I'm adding a new section here, going to be feedback, and we'll have that feedback for everybody. And then the workflow would be, especially when we go through a feedback, I'm going to ask all the technical console members to, if you have a feedback, please type it in directly into this story. So I'll be sharing the HackMD link with everybody, and then as we're going to review this, whatever feedback you have, please start typing it in, and then we'll propagate it all throughout and make sure that it's being accepted. So the actual feedback will start tracking at the workshop level, meaning the work at the HackMD level, and then propagating the results back to the GitHub. How does that sound? Is that okay with everybody?
That sounds great.
All right. So the workflow then would be for the feedback is that we're starting URI standard review. The first thing we'll do is I will make sure that I will share that in a notes section. And let me start the quick notes. Where are notes? Always get lost here. There was a meeting notes. Where is it? Did that disappear?
Yeah, it is renamed to private meeting notes. Yeah, below. Yeah, in private voice channels, private meeting notes.
Oh, oops. Okay, gotcha. All right, so 2022 5 20 technical console meeting notes. Okay, and then we can start a create thread, and then here we can say URI standard review feedback final.
The URI resolution one, I think, is in initial feedback phase, not final feedback. We didn't get a chance to get to it last time.
URI standard. We no. This is from the URI standard, right? We've gone
No,
through it.
resolution. The resolution one, the next one.
Yeah, the resolution. No, yeah, we're not there yet. We're for okay. All right, well, let's start with the URI standard final feedback. So you can maybe, Yuri, walk us through what have you updated, and obviously you and I went through this and we clicked on, we've gone through all of this, but then now let me add a new section for the final feedback. And today is, of course, 2022 5/20. And then everybody is welcome to start typing that in as we review this process in here. So Yuri, let's go ahead and maybe walk the team through
Yeah.
the changes, and then please, you guys, everybody should have the link at this point, and please feel free to start adding questions, additional feedback verbally, and of course capture that in the note.
So some of the feedback that we had from last time was for the authority and target sections to add the format or encoding that we support. But since we support any UTF-8 encoding technically, that's what we have listed here under the authority section. So wrap URI authorities can be any UTF-8 string with some constraints applied to termination. And in the next paragraph, we explain the termination. So the authority component is preceded by a double slash and it's terminated by the next slash. So target, I think for target, I just spoke to Jordan like half hour before this. So we agreed that this should be path instead of target because that's what's in the toolchain currently. So I'll just add that. Since we agree that the standards should reflect what's in the toolchain, and then if we want to make changes, which we should change the code, and then also create new versions of the standard or standards. So path URI, the wrap URI path is defined as everything that comes after the authority's terminating slash. It's only useful in the context provided by the authority, and then I have added that the format and encoding of the path URI is dependent on the authority itself, the authority to which it belongs. So it's up to the authority to define any special format or encoding. So if, for example, you have the HTTP authority, then that means you have percent encoding for the strings, so for the whole URI, for the path, you have query strings potentially and stuff like that. So that's for the initial feedback for the authority and target sections, and also for the last two, which is the UTF-8 and not supporting URI encoding. So our URIs are not percent encoded, although that applies to standard URIs as well. Based on the W3C specs, URIs do not have any special encoding. They can be any UTF-8 strings. It's up to the protocol in that scenario to define. So in our case, it's up to the authority. And the two feedback items from Jordan. So file system authority, that it should be file instead of FS. We agreed that since we're just reflecting what's in code, so in the toolchain, that we should just leave it as FS. And in the next version, we will rename that to file and also rename it in code to be file. And same applies to the ability to resolve or to redirect kind of different protocols. So, for example, HTTP or even file, we will be able to convert the URIs from HTTP into wrap URIs. And that's also in the next version of the standard, so nothing to do here. And that's it for the URI standard.
So that covers this and this. We talked about that's at the feature level. And we talked about that this is covered by the URI standard.
Yeah, so the
Standard.
URI itself is UTF-8, but the path is dependent on the authority.
Okay. All right. So that's I think that demonstrates that all of the initial feedback was incorporated, and I think that was collected on 5.6. Let me just actually make that so we have that 5.6. Are there any additional feedback and action items coming out of today's review session? No additional feedback items? This is ready for final acceptance? Yuri, sounds like
So
we, yeah, go ahead.
maybe one thing I keep thinking. So it's especially important in the next standard, the resolution standard. So for pseudocode or for defining types or schema for types, for example, in core.js, in our core library, we have the URI class. So should we have that class specified here? How it looks like? What's the structure? That's a question I would like to pose.
Yeah, so from what I have seen, Jordan has also added the invocation. In invocation standard, he also added some code snippets and code interfaces and pseudocodes there. So yeah, I think it may be good to like add that kind of interfaces and pseudocodes. But for the URI standard, I think this looks complete.
Yeah, I think where other code is present, we can add it, but here that's fine. Then another question I'd like to pose is for the code, for example, for the URI interface, I guess it's a class, but technically we should define it just as an interface. Or for example, for the URI resolvers and for the client itself, should we? So we will have code snippets. We will have those interfaces defined in the standards. So, as schema definitions, I guess. Should we keep them in separate files? So maybe like have an client interface file, URI resolver interface file, so that other standards can reference this type, this interface. And if we want to change it, we would only need to change it in a single place or something like that.
Well, I think that depends. So whenever like user wants to read this standard, he wants to like read everything on one page and don't want to like read it somewhere. But for keeping this stuff on GitHub, we can do it anyway. And yeah, we can also sync between it. And whenever we use some kind of docgen like docuserers, we can link everything together. So yeah, I think any approach would be fine, but from like user's perspective, everything should be like all the details related to one standard should be on one page. That's what I think.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So are there any takeaways, or this is ready for acceptance?
I have a question, Yuri. Just to make sure I understand, yeah, what you said. Basically, you meant that, for example, we have in the URI standard, we have explicitly defined class URI, right? So, you mean that we should define somehow like the type and attributes of this class, for example, or in a, I don't know, as GraphQL type, or yeah.
Yeah, either in TypeScript or GraphQL or some kind of pseudocode schema definition language. It'll be more apparent in the next standard. But yeah,
Okay, okay, just trying to understand. And I mean, what I have seen in documentation is that normally they do like this pseudocode. Normally it's in Python, for example, like a class with a big because it's I don't know, like from the documentation in Ethereum, like yeah, how they do it. But yeah, probably that would be enough if I understand what you're saying, like adding that pseudocode.
yeah, I think the standards should have some kind of pseudocode, probably. If not pseudocode, just type definitions, so that you can know. This is a bad example. This URI standard is maybe a bad example because it doesn't talk about any kind of code, any kind of algorithm.
Okay, but okay,
Oh, yeah.
no, no, just trying to understand your point and getting deeper into this. So, yeah, that makes sense. What you just said makes sense. Which I think it's a point Rush pointed, right?
Yeah, I think it's early to talk about it. We can talk about it in the next standard. It's more applicable. But before that, actually, I forgot. So we said we're gonna reflect what's in the toolchain, what's in the code, and wrap protocol or scheme is not in the code. It's W3. So I think we should rename that. Does that sound good to you guys?
Yeah, it does.
Sorry, you want to rename what?
So the wrap scheme should be W3 because that's how we currently have it. Also, I think there's a place where I haven't renamed the target plot.
So rename what to W3?
So wrap the scheme.
Um, and shouldn't it be the other way around? Like, shouldn't we rename what's W3 to wrap?
I agree with Nestor. Basically, we should be aiming for the future, right? And if we're going to change the code base eventually to the new branding, we think about this like with wrap?
Yeah, I'd say that we can have it correct in the standard, and that the code needs to be adapted in some point in the future.
So from our last workshop with Eugene and Jordan, we were talking about how we would handle changes to these standards and how we would define them. And some consensus between Jordan and I was that we should have the standards reflect what's in code currently, so as not to confuse anyone reading it, because someone will take this and write wrap and the resolution will not work. But then when we have pull requests to change the code, we can write new versions of these standards to reflect those changes.
I mean, I understand like the practical use of it. What bugs me just a little bit is that it seems like we are um, changing the standard based on an implementation specific. But if it's just for practicality in the short term, like I'm fine with either. I don't have any strong opinions.
So the problem with the opposite is you would then define these standards as sort of a wish list, how you want the protocol to behave, you know, everything to be defined. But that doesn't mean that the code will ever adopt this. Unless it's strictly implemented in code, it might not ever come to light. It might just be a wish list. That's the problem. And not only that, it also misguides anyone trying to read this and then use it.
I would like to. I mean, I understand your point, and I was talking with Jordan, and he told me that basically he wants to create like this forum post, like where we explicitly say what do we will need to change in the code base. So I don't know. This is like my 2 cents. That my suggestion would be with Nestor basically. So for the long term, we yeah, basically we aim to something, right? Since we are going to, I mean, do we want in the future like to be W3 instead of rap?
I
No,
mean,
we want to wrap.
yeah,
Sorry.
my point in general is that the the difference between like regular developer docs and these standard docs is that I think that the code should adapt to the standard and not the other way around. But then we're building the standard based on the code that we already have. So I mean, I understand how having this explicit differences may be misleading in many ways, but um, I mean, again, I didn't have it like strong opinions on this one, but I I tend to think that probably we should have things as we think they should be in the standard and adapt the code at some point. But yeah, those are my 2 cents.
Then I think we can have a proper call to discuss this since we do not have consensus.
Cool,
This is
cool.
a
Let me
good
add.
philosophical discussion whether code should follow standards or standards should follow code. Like, I have the opposite opinion. I think standards should follow code because they're called standards. It's something that's standardly used or implemented. It's not like a feature request. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. Let's discuss this later. And
yeah.
yeah, cool.
I,
But please, let's mention this somewhere so we don't forget about this.
yeah,
I would say, like, yeah, here I would like keep it so we don't forget about it because I think this is important.
yeah. So we'll keep it here. The other thing that I was going to recommend is that our standard. There's nothing wrong with having a section in the standard saying this is what it is right now, but this will, you have like a future section saying, this team was working on, or we're working on changing the standards to this, and have both in the same document. There's nothing wrong with that either. And because the documents the standards documents will change over time. They're a living, breathing ecosystem. So there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, to have more information in them, saying including both where we stand right now and reflective of the future or where we're going. And then, uh, uh, but at the end of the day, those future requests need to translate into appropriate um, stories and tasks in the appropriate projects, so monorepo and so on and so forth. At that point, that would trigger that, right? Um, so let me take a, but I agree that should be a conversation. So let me take a note, and I'm taking note offline of adding a conversation topic to our next meeting to discuss this particular topic, which is whether the standard should be reflective of the code, vice versa, or both.
I
Okay.
would love to have that documented. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm taking note on my notepad, but I'll add it to the agenda for the next meeting for sure. All right, I think that um, we're at a good stopping point for this standard. Let's cover. We have 10 more minutes before the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So let's maybe have a quick conversation about that, and then I'll need 5 minutes before the end of the meeting to schedule for the next set of sessions. So let me just do this real quick. So we had second. Okay, so URI resolution was the next one.
Yeah, give me a second. I need to check what's happening with my meeting.
Or do you want, Yuri, do you want to hold off on that until the next meeting? Doing that while I have time.
I
10 minutes
think
left.
I'm good. I'm good. I can do it now. Unless you have something you want to close off.
It's okay. We can do that offline. Let me
Okay.
just add a section for feedback for everyone to start. It's 5:20. Okay, so this is ready for review. Yuri, want to walk us through this, please?
Yeah. So the URI resolution is a process that the Polywrap client goes through to resolve a URI to a wrapper. That is its basic definition. Then we have a section on prior knowledge that it's dependent on the user, on the reader understanding the wrap URI standard, since this builds on top of that and all the different components. I'm not sure that, yeah, okay. So overview section, the resolution process instead of the client happens in the resolve URI method. The goal is to resolve an origin URI as defined in the standard and to return a wrapper or the final redirected URI if the origin URI cannot be fully resolved. So a resolution process does not necessarily end in a wrapper. It can end in a URI. Additionally, as a byproduct of that resolution process, the URI history is returned, which describes the process of resolution. It contains the history, of course, of the resolution process, and if an error is found during the resolution process, then that error is returned. We do not throw an exception. Then we have the method signature. I just use TypeScript for this, but maybe we could change it in some kind of pseudocodes SDL. Not sure. So the resolve URI takes in two parameters, a URI and options. A URI is either a string or the URI type as defined by the following interface, which is what I talked about a couple of minutes ago. And then the method returns the resolve URI result type as defined by, I could change this to be the interface maybe or something.
Sorry, the link is in the notes, by the way, for everybody to enter feedback. Already, you guys already see it.
Can you scroll up?
Sorry.
I was looking at my screen, so I'm not sure whether you're following. Okay, so I didn't mention what the options parameter is here. I could do that, but I'm not sure how deep do I want to go. So it's resolve URI options of the client config. I should probably list the resolve URI options, although that might be client specific, maybe. Maybe not all clients will have the same options. But also, should I be listing what the client config is, and how deep should we go with the types here? That's a question I would like to pose to the council.
Aren't we going to mention client config in the configuration standard?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, then I think it would be enough to like just link the configuration standard here.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I'll add the resolve URI options here. I think that's needed, but the client config is something you can just link to. That being said, I'm not sure how much should we define in these resolve URI options. So, for example, let me just quickly look it up. So there's a couple of properties. Here I'll just paste them. Here. So this might be something that's up to the client to define. So whether it supports cache or not, things like that. Like, will all clients support the same type of cache, the same options? Will they all support config? IDs, maybe. Moving on, there's the resolution process section that says that we start with an origin URI, and then the client goes through a list of URI resolvers that are defined in the URI resolver standard, which is yet to be defined, and they're configured in the client configuration. So for each resolver, a resolve URI method is called on it, and it delegates the resolution of that URI to that resolver. The result of that URI resolution process on the URI resolver is an instance of URI resolution result, as defined by the following interface. And you see it defines a URI, an API, because we haven't renamed our code base, and an error. And depending on the objects inside of that URI resolution result, the process can continue in different ways. So for example, if the result is a wrapper, then the process ends and the client returns that wrapper in the API property of the resolve URI result object that the resolve URI method on the client returns. If that result is the same origin URI, then the process continues with another resolver. If the result is a URI that's different from the origin, so the resolver actually redirected the URI to another URI. That happens, for example, with the ENS resolver. It redirects an ENS URI to an IPFS URI. Then the process restarts from scratch with a new origin URI. If the result is an error, the process short circuits and the client returns the resolver error, so the error from the resolver in the error property of the resolve URI result. During the resolution process, the client keeps track of all URI redirects so that if at any point a URI is revisited, then the client can return an infinite loop error in the error property. And the note section is from Jordan before this document was written, so we could have that as part of the initial feedback, maybe, or I think it's up to Jordan to see if everything is covered here. So notes isn't something that's part of the standard document. It's just like guidelines
feedback,
for
basically, right?
Yeah. But feedback before this was written.
All right, that's fine. I'll add them into a section like this so we can see that this is kind of other part of the feedback. All right, so do we have the feedback captured well at this point? Can we just go through this and make sure that we have Yuri, can you take a look at the feedback and see if this makes sense to you, and then I'll schedule the workshop to go through this and the notes and finalize it and make it available for the final feedback.
Okay, sounds good.
Just really quick, what do you think? Is this good for you? That makes
so
sense?
what if we use pseudocode instead of some concrete code here to not focus on one language but the interface and procedure of it? So that's for the type definitions. I think that'd be good, but it's kind of hard to do that well. You'd have to kind of design your own pseudocode language because you need to support generics, maybe support alias, support union types. I think that's kind of hard. Although I think this is worth discussing, definitely. Just in general, not even just for this standard.
Yeah, so let's discuss it during the workshop. I just want to make sure we don't necessarily need to go through them and address them right now. I just want to make sure that the feedback that is provided here makes sense to you and you don't have any questions about those requests. If not, if you do, then let's expand on them. Otherwise, let's cover them during the workshop.
Yeah, this sounds good. So add resolve URI options. Okay, I'll do that. I started that. So history also, yeah, that should be added. And for the pseudocode, I think we should have that not as a part of the workshop, but as part of the next technical council meeting. Basically same discussion as whether standards follow code or code follow standards. That's something up to the council to define. I think we should use that than to use it in all of the standards.
Okay, let me add that. I'm taking note. So we want to add just to make sure I heard you correctly, we want to add a discussion point, add the topic to the agenda to discuss the structure of the pseudocode and kind of maybe some of the rules around how to define pseudocode for our standards documentation. That correct?
Yeah, both for algorithms and for type definitions.
Okay.
And on this topic, just a final question, whether it should be part of the feedback or not. I have described the resolution process here, but should we have pseudocode to also kind of define it, or is the description enough?
Yeah, so from what I have seen in the ERCs and other standards document, what they do is they describe the procedure and the interface around it, but they also give the link to the actual implementation at the bottom. So we can do something similar where we describe the procedure and interface in our standard and give the actual implementation link in to like GitHub or something. We may in future have like multiple implementation in like different languages, and we can just give links of that.
Sounds good.
Amazing. I think being respectful for everyone's time, we're at top of the hour. In terms of the plan for the next set of conversations, I'll just gonna go down the list and based on priorities, schedule some meetings, and I'll communicate directly to you guys um, uh, in Discord in terms of invitations. But I think that we'll have next week a couple of meetings with, or Niraj, I think we'll try to schedule one of these based on priorities for you, um, and maybe WebAssembly runtime with Nestor, if that's okay with you as well. And then I think during the next agenda meeting, we'll go and prioritize more so we can, um, and maybe, Cesar, I was going to ask if you don't mind going through this project real quick and see if there is any of these stories that you would like to put your name on in terms of the participating in the workshops.
I will. Can you send the link? Where's it? Yeah, where can I access it?
Yep, yeah, send you the list for standards.
And yeah, definitely. What I was thinking of doing is to basically like ghost the first ones, the first workshops, and yeah, when like I have seen one or two, I can like be more comfortable with basically giving my opinion at the when setting a standard comes. But yeah, like yeah, I'm totally interested. So if you can send me a link, would be awesome. I will check
Yep,
it, and yeah, I will like keep track of
I
that.
just posted it in the meetings notes. If you can see it here.
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much once more time for joining our technical council meeting. I really appreciate everyone's participation and help, and looking forward to our next interactions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Eugene. See you guys.